So today we'll be doing a quick review of the Focal Elegias. Now these are Focal's attempt at a closed back version of the Focal Clear. Do they get close? I think they do. However, there are still some areas which the Focal Clear clearly does better. Looking at the build, this is a very well built headphone. The top is made of leather alongside a piece of perforated Alcantara, which touches your head. Now, this is a really comfortable design because there's a plenty of padding, but there's also a broad surface contact, so you won't have much of a chance of hot spots. Moving on, the yolks are very strong, made out of great quality of steel, and the clicking mechanism or the adjustment mechanism is quite sturdy, quite positive, and feels like it won't break anytime soon. Moving on to the cups, you get these very strong feeling plastic cups that have these dimples or perforations on the outside, and these really make it a very nice looking headphone, something I would definitely be happy to wear outside. And you also have a very nice metal back plate there. Now this does have a small vent which is behind the logo, and that does leak a bit of sound, so in terms of isolation this is actually pretty good. It is better than a lot of the headphones which claim they are a closed back, such as the Sony MDR-Z1R or the Fostex line, and this does isolate more than that, but it is not going to isolate nearly as well as something that's truly closed, or IEM, something like that. Now, these vents do leak a bit, so I think leakage is a slight issue with this, but unless you listen to your music very loud and in a quiet environment, I don't think that's going to bother a lot of people. Moving on to the pads. For the pads, you have, again, I think it's Alcantara. I'm not exactly sure, but it is a very comfortable material that, again, helps with isolation, but at the same time doesn't feel sweaty, and it is very soft, and you won't have any issues with comfort for this headphone. For the cable, they provide a fabric wrapped cable that is of very good quality. Connectors are great, and feels very sturdy, but I just don't think that this cable is something that is ergonomically very comfortable to have, due to the really stiff nature of it. Moving on, for the carrying case which comes with this headphone, it is, again, probably something you've seen with the Clears and a couple other headphones from Focal. It's very nice, very sturdy hard case, and has a nice cutout for you to store your headphone inside, and also, some straps there to keep your cables and stuff. So in terms of accessories, I think this is a pretty good amount for its price. I'm not complaining there. Now, onto sound. For this headphone, I think that it does sound very similar to the Focal Clear. So what does that sound like? So starting from the bass. The bass has a great amount of extension. Again, Focal drivers have a great reputation for extending down really low, and this is no exception. Even down to the lowest frequencies, the rumble was still very impactful and easily felt and heard. What it does lack a little bit is a bit of upper bass and a bit of mid bass. Now, if you look at the measurements, there are two small dips, one around 45 hertz and one around 175 hertz, and they're not major dips, but I'd say maybe 1 or 2 decibels. But that does reduce the slam quality of this headphone a little bit. However, the great extension still means there's a lot of rumble, and the slam is something that you can easily fix through a bit of EQ. So again, the bass is really good quality. It's just a bit of wonkiness there in terms of frequency response, which keeps it from being perfect. However, what the small dip in the upper bass does do is it makes sure that this headphone has virtually no mid-range bleed, which I think is a huge problem with a lot of closed-back headphones, particularly ones from Sony, because I think Sony headphones in particular have a very bad reputation with mid-range bleed, which I do not like at all, and this headphone has none of that problem. Moving on to the mid-range. The mid-range of this headphone is definitely pushed forward. It is definitely much more pronounced and neutral, and what it does do is make vocals very intimate. So anything that kind of falls in the range of vocals, jazz instruments, anything that isn't bass or treble, hits with a lot of authority and a lot of clarity. I think that that's one of the strong points of this headphone. It is very good with vocals, and the mid-range boost really makes a very soulful kind of headphone to listen to, a lot of character. Moving on to the treble. The treble, again, is really, really good. There is virtually no harshness there, and it's very well extended. There's a lot of air without being overkill, and there is also a great amount of detail. And overall, in terms of detail, this headphone resolves remarkably well. I think that it is pretty much on par with the Focal Alex from the short amount of time I had to listen to it, and definitely better than the Focal Elegia, which suffers from that weird frequency response, which again affects the detail retrieval a little bit, because there is literally a missing chunk in the upper mids and lower treble. So the Focal Elegia resolves remarkably well. I think it pretty much beats all the competition in terms of resolution. So we're talking about things like lower end Focal openbacks. We're talking about the Sony closeback lineup. The Z7 Mark II does not compete in terms of detail, not even close. The Z1R might be on par, but we'll have to see. I think it's actually worse still. It definitely beats out the Fostex cans, mid price cans for detail retrieval. And honestly, I don't think there's anything around this price that can even compete in terms of detail retrieval that is also closed back. Now, I have heard that the Aeon 2 competes in terms of detail, but I've yet to hear that, so that might be something to consider. And moving on, dynamics of this headphone is really good. Focal headphones have a reputation for having phenomenal dynamics, and this is no exception. The difference between the quiet sounds and loud sounds in a track is remarkably pronounced, and again, it's just leagues ahead of its competition. I don't think there's many headphones anywhere near this price range that is closed back that sound anywhere this dynamic. You might think that Focal headphones are more dynamic because they slam harder, but to be honest, that is much more to do with tuning and driver design rather than actual dynamics, so a bit different there. Now, moving on to the soundstage. This, again, is an area where this headphone excels a lot. The Focal Elegia soundstages remarkably well. It is quite wide for a closeback. Not as wide as something like the Z1Rs, but it is definitely as wide as a Z7 Mark II. It is pretty much wider than a lot of the Fostex offerings, which sound a little more closed. Really good width, but also it doesn't lose much in terms of imaging. This images remarkably well, and I can really easily pick out instruments in a mix. It separates them very well, places them pretty accurately within the soundstage that it has. So again, it's pretty much faultless there. Now, the main criticisms, again, is just the problems with the bass. That takes away from a little bit of slam, but it does have good rumble, so I think in terms of bass quantity, it's not lacking. It's just a bit of that impact, which some people might find that they need a little more of. And again, the isolation is good, but the leakage is a little bit more than I would have liked. So that is another reason that the Aeon 2 closed might be a little better, because that does isolate better. So if you are looking for a headphone that prioritizes isolation, that might be a better pick. But I do think that I like the sound of this better from the very brief listen I've had to that. But again, I've not had a long listen and not a proper listen to those headphones, so in terms of actual technical ability, I can't actually compare the two. Now, how does this headphone compare to the Focal Clear? Now, the Clear sort of fixes the major problem that this headphone has, and that is in the bass section. The Focal Clear does not have that weird mid bass and upper bass dips that take away from the slam. So the Focal Clear slams a lot harder, while also having a great amount of sub bass. And the Focal Clear has slightly less forward mid-range, so in that sense, it's even more neutral than the Focal Elegia. And in the treble region, it again also extends very well on the Focal Clear, and the treble on the Clear and Elegia is pretty closely matching. So the Clear just sort of does everything a little bit better. And on top of that, the Clear has better resolution. It draws more detail, and it's definitely the more resolving of the two headphone. But again, the Elegia actually performs remarkably well for its lower price tag, and the fact that it's a closeback. Clearly, from the fact that it can resolve as well as Alex is a feat in itself, I think, because Alex is a remarkably resolving headphone in its price range. Now, what about comparisons to other closebacks? Again, this headphone destroys the Sony MDR Z7s, because the Z7s main saving grace was comfort and soundstage, and this is as comfortable and as wide as those headphones. Those headphones try to boost their soundstage a little bit artificially by recessing the mid-range, but if you EQ both to around the same target, these are wider. And the Z7s lose out greatly in terms of resolution. It cannot pull out details nearly as well as this headphone does. And the Focal Elegia also has much better separation, much better imaging, and much better speed as well. So what about Fostex cans though? Fostex cans, I think, do have better slam. However, that does come at the cost of various things. The Fostex cans do not isolate nearly as well and leak even more than these. So those honestly shouldn't be even cold close cans. And also the Fostex cans do fall a little bit behind in terms of detail retrieval. I think that the Elegias actually resolve better than the Fostex headphones that compete in a similar price bracket. And also, I think that the Elegia is wider than the Fostex headphones in its price bracket, as well as having really good resolution, really good speed. Now, in terms of speed, I think that the two, headphones, the two are pretty comparable. Fostex cans such as X00 have a similar amount of speed to Elegia, but it does try to artificially boost that by its frequency response, which is clearly a V-shaped response, and that often gives the illusion of more detail and more speed because the treble often sounds faster than the bass. However, if you EQ to the same response, the Elegia actually keeps up in terms of speed. So overall, really phenomenal headphone. Great detail, great timbre, great tonality, incredible performance for its price, especially the fact that it's a closed-back headphone that competes even with open backs its price range. Only minor criticism is the mid bass and upper bass recession. Aside from that, I think this is almost a flawless headphone, especially given its price point.